for most people, I think the music, and even more so the albums that really resonate with them for their entire life, are the ones that they discovered during their most formative years. That's junior high, high school, college, pretty much, between the time you're 12, 13 up through your early 20s. That's when you become your own person. That's when you stop just liking what your siblings like, or your parents like, your friends like, and you really form your own identity. And I think that's true in regards to musical expression as well, and what you gravitate towards. So these albums are ones that, as I look back through all of my collection, try and figure out not necessarily what my favorite albums are, but the ones that really defined who I am during that period and have stuck with me all along the way. If you know me and you've watched any of my content, I don't think a lot of these will surprise anybody, but it just goes to show you that a lot of my bucket list, desert island list, top 10 list, a lot of these albums end up on a lot of those because, again, they're ones that I discovered that in most cases were released during those years where I really started to engage with music. So a tiny bit more context. In 1994, that's an important year, I was 16 years old. So I was certainly discovering my own music as early as kind of 90, 91, but not until really 93, 94, especially 94 when I'm 16, when I start driving, does really music take hold and basically changed my life at that point, and the trajectory of everything I wanted to be involved with. Ended up, picking up a guitar not long after that, and a lot of that is because of some of these bands and some of these albums. So first one on the list, I'll go a little, if there is a deep cut on this list, this is probably it, but it's one of those if you know albums. That is Blind Melon Soup. This came out in 95, and it was one of those where, if you know Blind Melon, you know that they were hugely popular a couple of years prior with No Rain on their self-titled album with the B-girl on the cover. But this sophomore album, 95, Soup, I don't even know if you can call it underrated anymore, because it certainly gets a lot of attention, thankfully, because it's an amazing record. But this is one that has just stuck with me ever since. There's a couple themes that I'll go through some of these albums. This is one of them. I loved the first record. Still to this day, I love No Rain, the single. I will not turn that song off. A lot of people think it got overplayed. I don't care. I think it's an absolute classic. And I loved that first record. When this record came out, like a lot of people, I was caught off guard. The first single, Galaxy, and the video for the single are a little bit abrasive, which I loved, because they were coming off of a vibe, for most people, knew them only for No Rain, and it was kind of like a lighthearted thing, kind of playful, certainly a softer image than a lot of the grunge bands from the era. So when they came out with Galaxy as the first single, man, did it hit me hard. It was like a punch to the gut, because you're like, forget about the last album. This is a new version of Blind Melon. Obviously, it's a tragic story because this is the last thing we got with Shannon Hoon. But it sticks to me. It still does. It comes up in lots of conversations. For me, it's one of the best of the entire era, and it is certainly one that defined me when I was, 16, 17 years old, and I've stuck with it ever since. I absolutely love this record. Blind Melon Soup. This came out in 95. That's the first one on my list. Obviously, this is a very personal list. These are albums that define me. I'm looking forward to see what other people mention. I think anyone who's a little bit older who grew up in the 80s, they're going to have a completely different list, because a lot of those people, were defined by hair metal, right? Or if you go back earlier, defined by, stadium rock, things like that. Next one on the list. Got to go down here in the T's to find my wonderful original copy of Ænima by Tool. This is an album, again, 1994, I start driving. That's very important, because that allowed me to go to shows, right? I no longer needed a chauffeur. I no longer had to tag along with my older sister or her friends, or get dropped off by my mom, which was happening a lot in 93. So as I got my driver's license, and was able to start going to shows. This is a good example of that. I saw Tool several times on the Ænima tour. I think maybe 3 or 4 times. Lollapalooza was certainly one of them a little bit later. They toured on this album for a while. As you know, Tool will release a record not very often. But this record, man, still to this day, it's really hard for me to name. Like, I can easily name Soup as my favorite Blind Melon record. Now, granted, there's only 2 records. For Tool, it's a tough one because I love the whole catalog. I really do. But as far as ones that really shaped me from my youth to current day, this is a no-brainer. Seeing the band, this was the last tour really where Maynard was up front in front of the stage, not hiding in the shadows. As soon as you got a few years later into Lateralis, he was already on a riser, from what I remember, like a separate drum riser next to the drums, and never really leaves that and still doesn't to this day. So going back to these shows and having very vivid memories of him painted completely blue, or coming out Lollapalooza with a bra on and fake boobs and like face paint like a clown and big high heels. Like, as a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid, like, it was game-changing, to say the least. And I think that's what this album is. I mean, it's not only the lead track, it's not only Stink Fist, which was really probably the lead-off single, the biggest single, but songs like Eulogy, songs like Third Eye, songs like H, through and through, a masterpiece in my opinion, and again, certainly one that shaped my musical identity. Let's see. Let's stay heavy as far as I go. This is one, again, shouldn't be a surprise. The Downward Spiral, 1994. This is an original promo copy that I've had since 94. I've told this story before, and I'll tell it again. I vividly remember when I bought this. I went with my mom to Target, and while she went into Target to shop, I went to the record store, which was just a couple doors down. A little tiny hole-in-the-wall record store, which wasn't around very long. And I walked into the record store, and I think I had heard at that point, I'd probably heard Closer, because it was either March of the Pigs or Closer. I can't remember which one came out first, but I had already gotten a whiff of what the new Nine Inch Nails was going to be all about. And obviously, coming off of Pretty Hate Machine and then Broken, and then you get, just slammed with this Downward Spiral record. I walk into this record store and it was playing, but it wasn't one of the singles I knew that had already come out. The deep cuts were playing because the record was spinning. And I remember at that time, this record store had old TVs, and it had all these old TVs, and it was playing the David Koresh Waco cult news that was going on, and it was like on a replay, and this was playing, and it was a little trippy. And I remember asking the guy, what are we listening to? He said, this is the new Nine Inch Nails. All he had was this promo copy. I think he had more than one. He took this off the turntable and sold it to me used, which is the only way I could afford it. I've had it ever since this day. But again, being 16 and 94, I was able to go to this tour and see the Downward Spiral tour at the Fair Park Coliseum in Dallas. Game-changing show. Vividly remember it as well. I vividly remember because I took my wife. I think it was the last. She only went to a couple Nine Inch Nails shows before she retired. She retired from Nine Inch Nails and Tool shows in the mid-90s. She'd had enough. But for me, I remember this being my first Nails show. I remember walking onto the floor with her, and just it felt like a pressure cooker. There was so much anticipation. Marilyn Manson was about to come on as the opener. Jim Rose Circus had just finished. Marilyn Manson's about to come on, which we had no idea what that was going to be about. And then to get to see the Downward Spiral in its glory during that era, just phenomenal. I mean, kind of the same as Ænima. Like, obviously I love Closer and March of the Pigs, but man, songs like Heresy, Hurt obviously is the big track from this. Big Man with a Gun, I Do Not Want This, Reptile. It's just unbelievable. I absolutely love Downward Spiral. I will stand by that one till the day I die. Changing gears. The Black Crowes, Amorica. Classic album in my opinion. This one strikes a chord for me because it is tied to a specific moment, or a series of moments, I should say, throughout my high school, college years, even into an adult, where a certain group of buddies that I have go on a yearly trip. We haven't done it in a couple years. We need to get back to it. But this is one of the albums that was the soundtrack to that trip. Every single year we're out on a boat in the middle of a lake and Amorica's playing. And it just, I can't put this album on without mentally going to the middle of that lake on that boat with these dudes who were my brother and my best friends and still are to this day. So it's that type of memory that an album can implant in you. You know, I can't separate the two. I can't separate that event and those people in this album. They're all connected in my mind, to where the moment I see it, the moment I hear it, that's where I'm at. And that's what's that's what the most beautiful thing is about music, right? But this record, Gone, Cursed Diamond, She Gave Good Sunflower, certainly Wiser Time, and it ends with Descending, which is one of the most beautiful tracks of all time, in my opinion. I absolutely love the Black Crowes. I love their entire catalog, but if you're going to ask me to choose one Black Crowes record, it's going to be Amorica all day long. Next on the list, let's do one that's a little different, and I got to go over here for it. Let's see if I can find it. I'm going to break camera real quick and find my copy of The Chronic. How about that? It's funny, as I thought back to the albums that defined my youth, I was trying to think outside genre a little bit, and there was no country albums back then. I mean, I appreciated 90s country, but there was nothing coming out that, you know, just like really took over my music. There was too much else going on in the rock world, right? Obviously, you had so much great music, let's just say between 90 and 95, specific to rock, that there was no way country was squeaking in there. And if you would have asked me back then, yeah, what do you listen to hip-hop wise? Prior to this album, not a lot. Like, I absolutely was into some of the later 80s stuff and into the earliest 90s, certainly NWA, again, related, you know, and Ice-T and Ice Cube. And there was some stuff bubbling up. Yo MTV Raps was cool to watch, but I didn't know it like, you know it very deeply. But then The Chronic hits and game changer. I mean, the videos on MTV were massive. It obviously is the introduction of Snoop Dogg. So yeah, this is legit. If I'm gonna go back and think about my high school years specifically, which is pretty much what I'm doing, this album was a big player. If I think back to all of the parties in high school and things like that, this was represented heavily amongst my friends, and a lot of that was driven by myself, because even if I go back then, I was probably DJing the parties in most scenarios, choosing the CDs that were going to be on, is what I mean by that. So The Chronic, man, classic album, absolutely iconic. That's another one. How about a couple from the true grunge titans, if you want to call them that? I want to grab I've got a couple copies of Superunknown right here. I'm going to grab one of my original copies. Here's an original blue vinyl copy. Came out the same day as Downward Spiral. That's a pretty cool fun fact. Just amazing to think that you go to the record store in 1994 and browse the new records, and Superunknown and Downward Spiral are right there. Which one do you choose, right? This one, I was already a huge Soundgarden fan because of Bad Motorfinger. I remember a little bit of Louder Than Love, but certainly Bad Motorfinger was huge. Rusty Cage and Outshined. And then they come out with this album. I saw them on this tour, same venue that Nine Inch Nails played, Fair Park Coliseum. Reverend Horton Heat opened, which was awesome. Local band from Dallas. They did that whole tour. They were on Sub Pop at the time. But this album, to this day, I will go to bat for it as one of the greatest rock albums of all time. This is, in my opinion, my generation's Physical Graffiti. Like, that's just how I think of it. I don't know why. I think it's because of the depth of it, the songwriting depth, and how good these guys were at their instruments and playing. It was just incredible. Live Soundgarden was a different thing, depending on which show you got, which Chris you got, how worn out the band was. I mean, they were a band for a long time by the time this hit. That's what a lot of people don't realize. A lot of people think, oh, Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, they all exploded right at the same time. yeah, but Soundgarden have been doing it for 10 years already, maybe not quite that long, but pretty much. Whereas bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, they're 2-3 years in max as far as those entities before they really started to get a lot of mainstream exposure. But Soundgarden, they had been doing it for a while. One of the OG grunge bands, along with Mudhoney and the Melvins and those types of early bands. But this record, I mean, give me the deep cuts again. Give me 4th of July. Give me Like Suicide. Give me My Wave. Sure, I'll take Fell on Black Days and Spoon Man all day long. But man, just so much depth. In my opinion, some of the most interesting, creative, rock-oriented songwriting of that period, for sure. Love Superunknown. All right, so if I'm going to do a Soundgarden record, I'm going to do a Pearl Jam record next. I've told this story a lot, and I'll tell it again because I love telling it. This album in particular is one for me. This didn't come out like 95, 96. I always get that messed up. I think it came out in 96. I saw him in 95 on the Anti-Ticketmaster tour, but this comes out in 96, if I remember correctly. I always mess that up. 96. So the story here is that this is the album that split Pearl Jam's audience. 10 versus Vitalogy. Bigger, and massive, right? All three of those albums were just huge. And then by the time No Code comes along, this is the band waving the flag saying, we're done. We're done. They had already stopped doing videos several years prior. By this point, they're done with interviews. They're done with their photo anywhere, and on the promotional materials, because they had gotten to a point where they just had to save themselves. And they've said this themselves, like if they wouldn't have made some of the decisions they made around this time period, that they never would have lasted. The other big thing here that changes is Jack Irons comes in on drums, which was a huge change coming from Dave Abraziz, who was just a powerhouse drummer on Versus and Vitalogy. You need a completely different vibe with Jack Irons. So when this album comes out and Who You Are is the first single, it's just a totally different vibe. And so many people, I vividly remember, friends in my circles basically being done with Pearl Jam the minute this album came out, because it wasn't the Pearl Jam they knew from the previous couple years. There was no Animal, there was no Go, there was no Deep, there was no Alive. But I'll put this up against all of them. It's the album where most people, retired Pearl Jam in their minds, and I absolutely doubled down and tenfold, because I was like, oh, this is the band for me long term, because I could see from this album that they weren't just going to rinse and repeat. They weren't just going to do the same thing. Again, adding on Jack Irons was, I think, the biggest blessing in disguise, because it gave them the excuse to just try different things. Go listen to In My Tree, Who You Are. There's some of the most gentle moments on this with Off He Goes and Around the Bend, but then you've got Hail, Hail. You've just got, and Lucan, obviously. So it is a very diverse album, and it's the album for me where I remember thinking to myself, oh, everyone's bailing from Pearl Jam. They're fucking idiots. This is when you double down right here. This is when you know this band's in it for the long haul. Like a lot of people, I didn't know if Pearl Jam was going to last after Kurt went away, and the explosion of how popular they were. It didn't feel like it was sustainable under any circumstance. This is the album I felt like, oh man, they're making the right moves to sustain themselves for an entire career. And to this day, a song like Present Tense, one of my favorite songs of all time, certainly one of my favorite Pearl Jam songs of all time, just represents a turning point in their careers and in the way I kind of saw them. So I love No Code. There was no way it was not going to make this list. Let's stay there. I'm not far away from it. It was impossible, absolutely impossible, to avoid this album right here. It was huge. It really was. Siamese Dream is just one of those, it was all over the place. The singles Today and Disarm and Rocket. Just really, really huge song. Chair Brock, that's the first song I remember. But again, Silverfuck, Mayonnaise, Hummer, just beautiful songs. Saw this band on my first Lollapalooza '94. Nirvana was supposed to headline. That didn't happen. Smashing Pumpkins filled in. Also had an incredible lineup. Beastie Boys and Green Day and Parliament Funkadelic was on. Oh my God, it was so good. '94 was a banner year. Like I mentioned, I'm 16 years old. I'm seeing Smashing Pumpkins on Lollapalooza. It was just out of bounds. Breeders were on that tour as well. But for me, the run of Gish, Siamese Dream, and Melancholy, and then certainly you could throw in the B-sides comp, Pisces Iscariot, which I love as well. That's an incredibly strong run that I think you can put up against just about any rock band from that era. I think songwriting-wise, production-wise, with Butch Vig, across the board, this is one that this stands out to me. And as I think if I had to go back and if there was a way to capture airtime back then in my car, this is one of those where the CD just got absolutely played to death. And so Siamese Dream, definitely one of those on the list. Let's see what else I got. Two others, I think. I got two more. I'm going to do these together. And they're both in the T's, so why not? Here we go. All right. I'm from Dallas, Texas. And in Dallas, Texas, in the early to mid 90s, maybe it wasn't Seattle. Maybe we didn't have bands breaking on a global scale. But man, when you're going to your local clubs on a weeknight and catching a sold-out show by the Toadies or a sold-out show by Tripping Daisy, or I mentioned Reverend Horton Heat earlier, and there's a whole slew of other great bands behind that one. These are albums that really, really defined my youth. And again, I own them to this day, as you can see, and I listen to them all the time because these albums will take me right back to those clubs. They'll take me right back to Deep Ellum in Dallas, or Denton, which was a college scene, or Fort Worth, another college scene, all within the Metroplex. We had a really unique setup for bands like this to be able to develop an audience, even just hyper locally, and be really successful at it and put on amazing shows. And I vividly remember being at these shows. This is Elastic Firecracker and Toadie's Rubberneck. Vividly remember being at shows during this era thinking, this is about to explode. Like, it felt just to us, the people that were in the middle of it, in the audience, on the stage, in the industry. I've talked to a lot of people, and they'll tell you that, yeah, we thought it was about to pop off. Like, you knew it because all these bands were getting signed and they were getting on MTV, they were getting on late night TV, and it just felt like that next wave was going to come. It didn't quite ever explode, obviously, to the level of what happened in Seattle, or maybe, to some extent Chicago or New York. But man, we had it good. We really did. And it was an era of time in local music that certainly changed my life, changed the trajectory of everything I did after kind of 94, 95. Again, when I picked up the guitar, started playing guitar, started forming bands, bring us full circle to current day where I'm still sitting here talking about them. So absolutely albums I love, highly recommend Elastic Firecracker, highly recommend Rubbernecks. Great albums through and through. So there you go. That's my list of albums that really defined my youth, albums that I still own and love and listen to all the time. So let me know what your list's like. Again, I know there's going to be a lot of people who grew up in the 80s because hair metal was a big thing. And when I say that, I mean, that could be GNR, that can be obviously all your Poisons and Warrants and all that stuff. Certainly Ozzy. Just amazing stuff in the 80s. Go back to Stadium Rock. I know there's bands who are going to, I know there's people who are going to talk about, if you're a little older, going back to things like Zeppelin and Floyd, certainly. But I think it's just inevitable that when your mind is forming and your mind is transitioning from a kid to a young adult, that stuff sticks with you. There's just something about what's going on there with the molecules, or whatever you're listening to right then. It's like glue. And it's really interesting for me to watch it happen in real time with my kids. That's what's interesting. And here's the greatest example is I remember just a year or two back, my son is at that time 13 or 14. And I remember asking him, hey, what's your favorite album by this band? What's your favorite album by that band? And he would inevitably name the most recent album. And he's heard a lot of the catalog. Maybe he doesn't know the whole catalog of certain artists, but I remember talking to him, and he was not gun shy about saying that his favorite Red Hot Chili Peppers record was Unlimited Love, which had just came out, because to him it was happening in real time, and there's so much value to that. So again, I was listening during this period to a lot of stuff like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and the Beatles and all of the classic stuff. But if I'm going to talk about stuff that defined me, it's the stuff that was released then because it felt like mine. Whereas all that other stuff's amazing, but it wasn't mine. It was another generation's. It was my older brothers or, my parents, whatever. But these albums and, just stuck with me so much more because they were released during that time. And it's happening right now with my kids, where I see new albums come out. Like, I know my son listens to a lot more of recent Pearl Jam stuff than the old stuff. He'll listen to Backspacer and Avocado album, which again, going back a little bit, and he appreciates the old stuff too, but it just doesn't feel as relevant to him because it was released a lifetime ago to him, or more than a lifetime ago. So it's interesting to see how the same sentiment is kind of holding true even within my household. So appreciate you listening. Let me know what's on your list. What are the 5 or 10 albums that really defined your youth? I'm looking forward to seeing some creative lists, and I can probably spy your age based on your list. That'll be my game. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.